Most of us are on LinkedIn. And most of us probably aren't using LinkedIn too well. And my guest today on this episode is the founder of Fuse, Mike McGloin, and he is going to talk to us all about how to more effectively sell on LinkedIn with a special emphasis on B2B founders and leaders. This is an episode you don't want to miss because no matter what role you play in an organization, the tips that he shares are going to help you be more strategic with the automations and technologies that you do use to reach people for better conversations faster. Stay tuned. Another episode of Humanize Automation is about to drop. You know it's here. You've tuned in another episode of Humanize Automation. Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Jill Schiefelbein, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with Mike McGloin today. He is the founder, CEO of Fuse, and what I really like about what he does and the philosophies he brings to the table is let's find ways, and he specifically does this, his specialty is in LinkedIn, but let's specifically find ways to use tools, technologies, AI, whatever it may be, to have more engaging, authentic conversations. So another person out there in the world who's saying, yes, technology can be used to make us more human. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jill. Really looking forward to it. And yeah, diving into what you mentioned, I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so excited to dive in more, to get to the nitty gritty, the tactics, the strategies. You know, I love that stuff, but I do want to know kind of what lens you bring to this conversation. How did you kind of get to where you are the founder of this company, and specifically, you know, why LinkedIn?
Yeah, sure. So it probably makes sense to go back to day one in my career. So naturally, I grew up in sales. So, you know, my first job was a recruitment consultant, and this is going back 16, 17 years, where you basically sit down and your boss tells you to say, there's the phone, make 250 calls or you're not leaving the office. Like that's how I grew up in sales. And obviously it's quite a tough school to grow up in, but the reason I like to mention that is because the power of human connections always win, you know, and I think, you know, having those real human connections is always what's worked for me in the past. So I grew up in a sales environment. So the first 6-7 years of my career was in recruitment, leading teams in the UK, Dubai, then Los Angeles. But as I started to, you know, develop as a professional and then a founder, I moved in a lot more into like the strategic marketing side of things. So I've been the founder for Fuse for the last 8 years. And originally what we did was brand strategy and marketing. So that was the first variation of what we did at Fuse. So we work with, you know, a lot of B2B brands, you know, doing a lot of like strategy, you know, doing a lot of like strategic positioning. How do you want to sound? You know, what type of people you're targeting? And then we essentially created marketing, sales that helps engage those specific types of companies. So now what we do is we're a social selling company. So specifically on LinkedIn. So what we help specifically B2B founders use LinkedIn as a predictable pipeline generation strategy. And I know we're going to dive into it, you know, in this pod, but for me, I don't think it's ever been so easier to stand out on LinkedIn because of the rise of, you know, some of the automation people are using, but also some of the really good tools that they can use to help, you know, assist with that strategy. So that's how I came to be. So that is my life in 3.5 minutes. So that's essentially, you know, how I've grown up in the sales environment, then moved into like the technology side of things. And now that's become full circle where we're a social selling agency that really value human relationships, but also are quite aware of the technology that can help develop those as well.
No, I think it's great. And it's I always like hearing kind of people's trajectory that got them where they are today. Like the first 2 episodes of this show were me being solo, just talking about, hey guys, here's the lens that you're going to be getting from this, from my perspective, because I think everyone's lens brings a very unique perspective to the topics that are at hand, to particular problems that may exist, to the solutions that come up. And what I found fascinating and find fascinating about what you do, and I don't know if you knew this, Mike, or anyone listening knew this, because I don't think I've talked about this in depth on an episode yet, is when I did my doctorate, my research and the theory base for it was largely in B2B sales, business to business sales, instead of business to consumer sales, because it's a whole different ballgame and it's a whole different set of conversations. So Mike, one of the things I noticed that you do at Fuse, which I think is really cool, is that you work with a lot of B2B founders and are really working on encouraging the founders, the CEOs, the lead executives of these B2B organizations to be the ones that are actually doing a lot of the vocalization and leading the conversations. I would love to know the path that you took to get to that space.
It took a lot of work to understand, who gets the most value out of social selling on LinkedIn. And I think why we focus on, the founder and leader side of things. One, I think it's a massively untapped sales channel. A lot of leaders, they're busy doing other things, right? A lot of time they're raising money, they're improving process, they're hiring, but using them as an actual sales channel, I think for a lot of companies, especially on the smaller side, so 50 employees, small sales teams, we believe that utilizing the authority of a founder's voice and profile is one of the best ways that you can engage potential prospects. So, for me, whenever I engage with any sort of content, or if it's a message on LinkedIn, a lot of the time I look at the profile and say, who am I speaking with here? And if you've got a really senior leader who's a founder or a CEO or a president who's got a cool product, and you look at it, it's like, right, this straight away, this gives a lot of authority to the conversation of what they're putting in. So I just think it's an untapped sales channel, and it really does work. So yeah, I think it's the authority, it's having that authority as a founder to help, build pipeline through using that power as a founder's voice. Yeah,
I think it's very interesting too when I, travel. I just got back from doing this 5-country speaking tour that I worked with in the hospitality and travel industry, and these luxury networks were really trying to pin together the advisors that sell the travel and the partners and suppliers who are the hoteliers, the tour providers, the cruise lines, etc. And at these events, you'll see the regional people, right? The sales reps, and this is B2B, right? Because they're selling to the advisors who then sell to their clients. What you see is you'll see the regional reps in the area, but more often than not, you actually get the heads, the founders, the leadership coming in too, and having that face-to-face time with those advisors who maybe up until then, they've only interacted with maybe the head advisor in a massive company. Now, all of these advisors are getting a chance to have that face time. And I see the difference it makes in the excitement that people get when they're interacting with the leader. But I also never would have thought to say it in a very tactical phrase, to operationalize leadership as a sales channel. That's not the first thought that comes to mind, even though I've seen it happen firsthand.
Yeah. And the other thing as well, at least all of the founders and businesses that I work with, you talk to them about the number one thing that they're looking to try and do is growth. And for me, they don't, as long as they've got a channel that's working, and they've got something that's a strategy that helps assist with that growth, it's something that they'll consider. And as I said, I think it's something that I think is getting more popular, in terms of founder-led sales, founder-led content. And I know it's not generally a new concept, but I just think with the shift that's happened from a B2B standpoint, especially on LinkedIn, which we might get into later, of how noisy it is. Everyone's a content creator. Everyone's got access to these automations where it's like, hey, Mike, we've got this product and service. No one cares. No one cares, So I think now more than ever, it's such a easy thing to grasp that, you put the right strategies in place with the authority of a founder's voice on LinkedIn, with using the right tools and tech to, assist with these strategies, it can become a really good, alternate way for these B2B founders to grow. And also to, build their presence on LinkedIn and, socially, which I think is really important, and I think it will continue to be important regardless of what happens with any sort of like advanced tools and tech.
And I think what's interesting about LinkedIn, so kind of two stories real quick, like LinkedIn is not my favorite thing in the world. Like anyone who's ever heard me talk about social media, like I don't get enjoyment and pleasure out of LinkedIn, right? When I open my Instagram and I see, travel inspiration or crochet patterns or cat memes, like I get very happy. LinkedIn does not do that for me. So I have had for years now, my assistant manage my LinkedIn messages. And what's funny is to this day, one of my best friends actually cold reached out to me on LinkedIn, and my assistant came back and said, this person seems interesting. This may be an automated thing. I am not sure, but he's also local. You just moved to this area. So, I'll leave it. I left it in your inbox. I didn't flat out delete it. So I sent a message back, very short, asking for a specific piece of advice, thinking if I get a link, if I get a video, if I get a sales pitch, like you're out of here. And I got a very thoughtful, very human response. And to this day, years later, we are really, really close friends. And it's that weeding through the noise. And like Mike practices what he preaches, guys, because he did the same thing with me. Like he had a really interesting post. I made a quick comment on it. And he pinged me via Messenger right away. He's like, hey, I saw you comment on my post. I went to check out your profile. The work you're doing with this, something very specific, seems very interesting. Care to have a conversation to see how our worlds overlap? And I'm like, yes, that is a lovely conversational, quick, non-salesy message. I'm here for it.
And you've hit the nail on the head, just in terms of how, this goes beyond LinkedIn. But like, for me, if it's LinkedIn, if it's down the pub with your mates and you're meeting a stranger, conversations need to be earned. You're not like every conversation needs to be earned. So if you could imagine, if anyone who's listening goes into their inbox now, I reckon about 90% of the new messages that they've got say, hey, my name is Dave. We are this company that do this, that can help solve your problems with this. First message. If you put that in a real life human situation and you're just walking down the street and someone says, hey, my name is Dave Smith. I work at this company. You'd be like, who are you, mate? Like, I don't even know you. Like, this is a weird interaction. And it's the same on any platform that, you've got to build real connections and real, earn the right to speak to someone. And as I said, that's just like human psychology, you warm people up and then you think, right, well, this person, I liked what that person has said here. I liked how they've interacted with me. They might get my time. So those conversations need to be earned. As I said, I always like to put that, that analogy of like just being in a restaurant and being down the pub. And, if someone approach you, most people are getting approached from the B2B standpoint, you'd be like, this person's crackers. Like, I don't want to speak to him. And again, I think it's the same. And that's where for me, most people are getting it wrong from a whole strategic standpoint. As I said, I'll probably say LinkedIn about 100 times this podcast because it's what I know and it's like, it's my world. But as I said, it's just, for me, it's easier than ever just to stand out on LinkedIn if you just follow some very, very basic rules.
Well, and it's interesting if we look at kind of the evolution of LinkedIn and the types of messages we can see. Now, you can pay to play to be able to message anyone a certain amount of times every single month, right? If you're paying for Sales Navigator, if you're paying for different packages. But that type of, you pay LinkedIn, they give you access to more of their members. That's really how that's working. But a lot of people, when it first started out, and automations, let's get into this a little bit, right? Like automations on LinkedIn first became a thing where you could do these auto kind of spray and pray type messaging strategies. And, it hit maybe 1 in every 100 messages. So people were like, let's just keep doing it because it's no effort. Now that's awful. We don't want that. It may have been novel at first. It's not there now. But you can use a lot of automations to get you, let's say, 80% of the way there and put your humanness on the other 20%. So I would love to know, when you're looking at the different automations, LinkedIn offers, or the different things that you can use tools for in strategies, what are you seeing? What are you recommending?
Yeah, absolutely. So just on that point with, just before I go into that, I think I'd love to talk about just things that I know are happening and things, some really big shifters of what happening on LinkedIn. So I've got a really good friend who I've known for 15 years who's senior leadership at LinkedIn. So he really knows what's going on. And there has been, over the last 3-4 years, been a rise in these automation tools, these spray and pray techniques, all of this stuff that basically LinkedIn actively don't want on the platform, because ultimately it devalues the product. They want real connections and real, ideas and thoughts being shared on LinkedIn, without having to use all of these just really rubbish and basic tools. So I spoke to him this week actually, and LinkedIn are going to be, planting a flag for these, really below par, plugins where, like you say, it would just spray and pray. Everyone's getting the same message, the same automation, and they're canceling more accounts than ever, just because they need to protect their products, because otherwise it's just going to get out of control. The amount of times that I speak to founders and they say, I've abandoned my inbox. Like, it's impossible. It's getting like what your email inbox is or used to be, where you're just getting hundreds and hundreds of irrelevant messages. So LinkedIn have basically put a flag in the ground and saying, this is not okay. Having said that, some of the best tools that I really like to use for LinkedIn, for me, it's about how do you position yourself for the best possible success. And one of the ways to do that, and there's some really good platforms out there, is using Sales Nav to build your foundational, target lists, and then using tools like Clay, where you can plug in that list to Clay. And then if you really know who you're targeting, your ICP, then Clay can do is say, okay, does this company have a job posted? What is this company saying on their website? Has this person said anything, in the news that might be relevant to you that you can then pick up on? And so for me, that's just the smart way of doing it, that you've got, say, a foundational, target customer list of, say, 1,000 people. You plug that into Clay and say, right, out of that 1,000 people, I know that 150 of people of these are looking for a product development manager role. Okay, that's a really useful piece of information to have when you start building your network. Not that you should go in and say, look, I know you work looking for a product development role, because that, again, it's a little creepy, but it's just a really good way to essentially be, say like an SDR, like a digital SDR, where you can go and say, look, go and research all of the people who might be looking for X. So you can do that with a Sales Nav search, plug that in to really refine it within Clay. And for me, that is, some of the really good tools and tech. If you can utilize those type of things, plus with the right strategies and outreach, that's when people are winning. That's how people are using AI and using automation in the right way to build relationships from a B2B standpoint.
I love it. I kind of want to summarize what you said and clear up a few acronyms, because not everyone listening may know the acronyms. So ICP is your...
All right. So ICP is your ideal customer profile.
Right. And so when you're thinking of that, you can use tools like Sales Navigator within LinkedIn to kind of get that profile narrowed down. And most of you probably already have that in your head. So with a few clicks, you're going to narrow that down pretty quick. And then when you get into that, using a tool like Clay, and I wasn't aware of this tool, so I'm now excited to go look at it, but it's kind of like your research assistant for all of these things, trying to find commonalities and trends to help you out. And then you threw out another one, SDR, enlighten us.
Sorry, SDR is a sales development rep. So sales development representative. And the reason I mentioned that is because, 4 or 5 years ago, like an SDR, sales development rep, a lot of their thing was research. Go and research the companies that are doing X and Y. And come up. And let's build out some of those strategies how we can engage these type of customers. Now with the rise of with some of the tools that I've mentioned, you can do that in a couple of hours. Which really look to manual entry and manual research to do. So that's what excites me about this type of the rise of these type of tools, tech automation, when used in the right way, can be extremely powerful and just such a time saving activity, which I know for a lot of B2B leaders and founders, time is always the enemy.
And when you think of some of these tools, right, like you get the research done for you, then I think immediately I'm like, okay, going with your example, okay, so they're looking for a product development manager. I would then go out to ChatGPT or Jasper or whatever, generative tool I'm using and say, if I am a B2B founder and I am trying to find ways to connect with a company leader who is currently hiring for project development manager roles, what are some of the key pain points they might be experiencing if they don't have someone in that role currently? Bam, if any of those pain points match my product, now I have some language that I can use in starting those conversations without, as you said, being creepy, like, hey, heard you're looking for a product development manager.
Exactly. It's funny. I've literally just finished I've just put what we do a lot is what I love to do is basically give away our IP, and I give away what we do so other people can use it. So I've just done that. So I basically, one of the guys that we've just done is how to develop your ICP. The question you should ask, once you've got that, plug it into ChatGPT and it will build out an avatar for you, with these type of questions. And again, that's what I love, just being able to use these tools to, the most effectively. And I think for me, with all of these tools, on all the AI, it's only as good as what you're plugging in, and that's when, you can really get smart with it. Like you say, right, if this person is in this industry looking for this type of job, what are some of the things that he might be interested in? Mm-hmm. So you're just not going into it blind, which again, for me, most people are doing. They're just hoping something sticks.
They are. And people are like, well, ChatGPT doesn't know everything, or it may not give you all the right answers. Well, yeah, that's why you're a human and you review it, but it gets you 80% of the way there. It gets you an outline. It makes you able to use your brain to generate those conversations based on prompts instead of first using your brain to be like, all right, let me think of 5 different things that might be an issue right now. ChatGPT can spit out 10, then I narrow it down to 5, and then I narrow it down to my conversation. It's just this type of efficiency and approach. To me, we're spending time on things that actually do make that human difference, that do make that connectivity possible, instead of relying solely on a tool to automate.
Absolutely. Completely going off topic here, but one of the things I've used ChatGPT for over the last 6 weeks, on your phone, you can do the voice recording, and speak into it. I use it as my journal now. I journal, you can set up these frameworks, and I journal in it every day, saying, look, this is what I've done this week. This is what I'm looking to do. And then, I've given it prompts, say, can you include that in my Sunday wrap up? So I can physically write it down in my journal. So that for me, again, completely off topic, but again, I love just seeing different ways of how you can use these different tools. And as I said, it's just exciting to see, how things are developing and how things are adapting. Just across the board.
Well, I think I did the webinar yesterday for an organization association, and one of the things I talked about and how I have just gotten in the routine is the first thing every morning. I use Google Workspace, so I use that, but you can do this through Copilot and Microsoft, whatever you have. I ask it to summarize and make a list of the top 10 priorities that are in my existing inbox and see what it comes up with. And do I use it verbatim? Absolutely not. But it, as a quick glance, instead of scanning through the hundreds of emails that came in, at a quick glance, I can see what will be priorities, search for those, and then go weed those out. And so again, it's just a different prioritization on time. And it's something so simple, but once you make that a routine and habit, you do become more efficient. You do save a lot of time. Am I at the point where I'm letting it write emails for me? No, I'm not, because I enjoy writing. And I don't want to be that formulaic, but for some certain types of emails, yeah, absolutely. The, thanks, but no thanks emails. Yep. No problem. You sent me a generic message. I will respond with a very much generic message too.
Yeah, exactly. Do you like Google? Do you like Google Workspace for that out of interest?
You know, my infrastructure is set up in there, so I am not going to change it. That's for sure. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, it's kind of the tool of path of least resistance for something that's automatically built in. If I want to do a more complex task, I'm always going over to ChatGPT. No questions. You
Yeah.
know, from having it put together, documents, dossiers, different client profile types, kind of like what you mentioned, like, hey, I'm trying to sell X to Y. What are some key points, you know, that I should make? And I put information about the industry, even copy the URL from a website in there. And again, it's not writing my sales pitch. It's just kind of your extra set of eyes, because when you're in business and you're plugging along day to day, even if you have a great team under you, sometimes there's not time to reach out to the team, or you don't want to divert from their existing activities. So this is kind of that, you know, invisible partner that you have
Yeah.
that looks at things differently.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
I want to know a little bit more as we kind of wind down to the end of this conversation. You have some great, as you said, you like to create IP and put it out there, right? And I'm a big fan of that too. It's like, hey, you want to know what I know? Here you go. You want someone to truly help you execute? You know who to call, right? But here's the basic idea. This is not rocket science. It's not proprietary. I'm not trying to hide it from anybody. But one of the things that you have done is, in putting out a lot of this content, you're giving people these frameworks. You're also practicing what you preach, obviously, on LinkedIn. But when you are looking at these documents, how are you, I'm asking this first, how are you distributing this IP, right? What processes do you have in place? We know how you make conversation starters, but how do you distribute IP when you know it could be of use to someone?
So the first point of call is posting it on LinkedIn. So if you position that correctly, you've got a good network and you know the formula, how to get people to engage with this, that is where a lot of how I distribute it. I did a post last week that's one of my better ones, well, one of my best ones, to be honest, where, it's gone absolutely crazy. And I've had like 350 comments on it and 160 requests. And, for me, that's enough. That's enough for the next 3 or 4 weeks. And then how else do I distribute it? So that goes back to the fact that, these conversations need to be earned, so like, then you can start, you put it in a slightly different context and, right, I've got all of these people I've spoken to over the last 2 years. These people might find it valuable, whether that's, reaching out directly on LinkedIn, whether that's in any sort of community groups that you're in, which is always a good one, any sort of Slack groups where it's like, you've got a B2B founders group on Slack where, they want people to share these type of resources. That's like a really quick win to like say, right, here's the resource, hope you get some value, and you can put it in there. So especially like for me, the paid Slack groups where it's like $5 a month or $50 a year, usually that filters out a lot of the riffraff where you not riffraff's the wrong word, but people who are just wanting something rather than they're sharing something. So some of those Slack communities are really good if you can offer that type of value. So first port is called as LinkedIn to build my profile. Second port is in the nurturing part where if that's in an email, whether that's in a LinkedIn message. And third part is what type of community groups can I plug this into, so these people can get some value as well.
And I looked at this post and I really liked, your comments on it. It was a really good strategy. You told them what you were going to deliver, were very succinct and clear. And you're saying, if you want this, I'll send it to you, but comment founder. And again, that's someone essentially opting in to you starting a conversation with them, right? So you're getting that opt-in. It's helping your LinkedIn algorithm for sure, but then it opens up lots of different conversations. And everyone, you can definitely go to Mike's profile. I'll even link this post in the show notes. So if you want it, like, it's a really cool document. I found some value on it. I am not a B2B founder. I work with a lot of B2B companies, but even some of the tips in it, I'm like, yeah, I should probably be doing that more. But it's the LinkedIn pipeline formula for founders. So I really like that. But I think it's a brilliant approach. And anyone listening right now can take that approach away and do it. But again, I think even to get those comments, you have to have earned that reputation and trust over time by the actions that you've put out on your page.
Yeah. And it's all a process. It's all a system. It's, the way, and this is through like years of, marketing strategy and, learning the psychology of selling. It's all a strategy in terms of how people engage with certain pieces of content. So it's all that process. It's funny. So that post has done like really, really well. Like it's not, I wouldn't say that's the norm, but obviously it's hit. So now I've done, and this is just, for anyone listening from a sales strategy point of view, if you've done something right, listen to that and do it again, because that's what's hitting. So that post, that guide I did last week. So the one that I've done this week is how I did that guide and how I got all of those posts. So it's like, how do you build that lead magnet? How do you promote it? And as I said, it's all about, sharing your knowledge. And, if they work with you or not, I don't really mind because I don't really care, to be honest, because ultimately if you do the right things and do the right reps, that will come naturally. But, I love providing value for people who might not have the resources to have the team to, do it. Is that right? This can provide some really genuine value. Maybe it's for, a younger person who's, just getting started. So for me, it is, not being scared to like show your hand and say, look, this is exactly how we do it. If you want to do it yourself, fine, like, that's great. But ultimately, again, it's just that social selling part of the thing. It's like, I want to give you value. And I think if you have those type of principles, you'll generally do well from a B2B standpoint.
No, I think from any sales standpoint for that matter, right? It's that more of the giving than taking. So this show, obviously called Humanize Automation. We've talked a lot about the human elements of automation, but one of the things you point out in this report, and I would love for you to kind of dissect for us in your automation stack. You talk about Sales Navigator, you talked about Clay, but there's this other one in there called Canbox. How are you linking all these things together? And, what have you found from having multiple tool stacks?
Yeah, my tech stack's quite simple. So I've already talked about like Sales Nav, Clay to find those lists. What I use Canbox for specifically is just to organize my pipeline. So LinkedIn is, just especially like your connections, it's quite hard to manage, especially if you've only got like if you're not paying for Sales Nav, it's quite hard to like manage those lists. So I purely use it as a visual tool. You can go in there and create specific pipelines. It could be one for ad tech, HR tech. Then you've got these people in a really visual pipeline within that. So you can just manage them a lot easier. So, I like it because, every single day, me and my sales team say, right, these people are cold and they're in this stage of the pipeline. We need to try and move them across there. And it's just a really good visual way to do that, which you can't do on LinkedIn just from the basic version, which a lot of people have. So I like that combination of, let's find out all of these hyper-targeted prospects. Let's organize them in something like a Canbox and then ultimately manage that from a visual standpoint. The one thing I'll say, just as, if anyone's listening and is looking at this, as I said before, just be really careful with your automations on LinkedIn now. With any sort of tool that you're using, do your due diligence. Know that if you think, right, this is what I can do now. I can use Sales Nav and Clay and then put it into Canbox and then send out, as many connection requests or up to the limits. Warm it up. Because there are activity controls on there. So just be very careful in terms of any sort of like tool that you're using, especially on LinkedIn. Just be aware and do due diligence. But done it right, like Canbox, like Clay, it works very, very well.
No, thank you for sharing. I love learning about new tools. I know our listeners here do too, because hey, if something fills a need, I want to go check it out. And I'm thinking, you know what? I know myself enough to know that I'm not going to be spending tons of time on LinkedIn, but man, if I can give my team another tool to make my time on there more efficient, I am all about doing that. So when I'm on there, I'm not wading through things. I'm only going to those high target value activities. There's a column that says, Jill, do this. Well, that's pretty easy for me to take care of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Mike, this has been an amazing conversation. I appreciate you sharing your insights on kind of the social selling, the B2B founder perspective on LinkedIn, your tool stack and beyond. I'll definitely put the link to that post, to your LinkedIn profile and everything in the show notes for anyone who wants to go check that out. Highly encourage it. Mike posts a ton of good content. One of those people that, if it weren't for LinkedIn, I never would have come across. So grateful for that platform now. Mike, any lasting thoughts or a final note that you want to leave with the audience?
Might sound like a broken record because I feel like I've just said B2B social selling LinkedIn. But that's just my world. And as I said, I think, if you are using, any sort of, if you are on LinkedIn and you are like, want to help build that for growth, whether, regardless of what your industry you're in, I just take the time to really understand, what is working and just not, follow the crowd. Because for me, from a brand strategy standpoint, from a marketing strategy standpoint, any sort of sales, if you follow the crowd, you're going to get left behind. And I always like to think, do what 95% of the people are not doing, which is just caring a little bit more in terms of, not relying on AI, not relying on automation, because I think it can make a lot of people very lazy. They think, right, that's sorted now. I'm just going to press the button and that's going to solve all my problems. As I said, when used correctly, it is very powerful, but I would say don't let it make you become lazy. Like human outreach, human relationships, they always win. And then you can put them in even a better position to win when you get smart with AI and automation to, just direct your best intentions and your best, ideas, which are emphasized and enhanced by using the tools in the right type of way.
Mike, thank you so much again for sharing your insights. Everyone, thank you for tuning in to, whether it's your first episode or many episodes in, thank you for being here. As always, the host kindly requests, go subscribe, go leave reviews, go comment on things, all that type of engagement stuff that we love to hear. And of course, if you have any suggestions for guests or topics for a future episode or mini episodes that you want me to kind of teach out, don't hesitate to let me know. Thanks again so much for tuning in. We will see you on another episode.